My daughter-in-law smiled sweetly as she set the plate in front of me. Something felt wrong. I checked the date on the package in the trash. Expired 3 weeks ago. I smiled back, and while she wasn't looking, I switched our plates. Minutes later, she was clutching her stomach and screaming. That's when my son walked in and saw what I had prepared for them both. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment. From which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The doorbell rang while my fingers were tracing the edge of my husband's recipe card. The ink was faded, but I knew every word by heart. I set the card down on the counter next to the chopped onions and celery. The bell rang again, a quick, impatient sound. I knew it was her before I opened the door. Chloe stood on the porch, a canvas grocery bag in one hand and a smile on her face that was a fraction too wide. "Martha," she said, her voice like sugar, "I hope we're not too early. I wanted to come help you finish up." I stepped back to let her in. "You're right on time, dear. David isn't here yet." "I know," she said, breezing past me into the hall. She placed the bag on the small table by the door, the one that held a photo of David in his cap and gown. He got held up at the office. He said to start without him. She shrugged off her light jacket, folding it over her arm with precise movements. "I told him I'd be your sous chef." The kitchen was warm and smelled of browning beef and thyme. I watched as she entered it, her eyes scanning the counters, the simmering pot, the neat mise en place. She placed her jacket on the back of a chair. "Something smells amazing. Your famous stew?" "It was Michael's favorite," I said, moving back to the stove. I stirred the pot. "David always requests it." "How sweet," Chloe said. She began opening cabinets, familiar in a way that felt invasive. She found the glasses and set 2 on the counter. "Oh, he's so sentimental about these old traditions." "I brought a few things, by the way. I was at the market and thought you might need reinforcements." She gestured to the grocery bag she had carried in. I continued stirring. "That wasn't necessary. I have everything." "Oh, I'm sure you do," she said, her tone light. "But you know how these things go. You think you have a full can of something, and it turns out it's practically empty." She began unpacking the bag, a new container of dried thyme, a box of salt, a can of cream of mushroom soup. I looked at the can. My hand paused on the wooden spoon. "I have cream of mushroom in the pantry." Chloe picked up the can, her manicured nails tapping against the metal. "Do you? I must have forgotten. I just saw it on my list and grabbed it. Better to have too much than too little, right?" She smiled at me. Her eyes were bright and empty. "Here, let me open it for you. My hands are stronger." She took the can opener from the drawer. It was a simple manual one I'd had for years. She positioned it on the can's rim. "You know, David and I were just talking about pantry organization. It's so easy for things to get lost in the back, to go past their prime without anyone noticing." The opener clicked and whirred. "We got one of those new systems for our condo. You can see every expiration date at a glance. It's a lifesaver." She peeled back the lid and held the can out to me. The contents looked normal. I took it from her. "Thank you, Chloe." "Of course." She turned to wash her hands at the sink, her back to me. "It's the least I can do. I worry about you here all alone, doing everything the old-fashioned way. It must be easy to lose track." I did not respond. I carried the can to my pot, but first I tilted it toward the window light. My eyes found the small print along the rim. Best Buy, November 2023. It was now March. The can had expired 4 months ago. I stood very still. The simmering sound of the stew filled the silence. Chloe was drying her hands on a towel, humming softly. I placed the opened can on the counter. "This is expired," I said. My voice was flat. She turned, a look of innocent surprise on her face. "What? No, it can't be." She came over and took the can from me, studying the date. Her brow furrowed in a perfect imitation of concern. "Oh, Martha, you're right. How did that happen? That market must have sold me old stock." She shook her head, clicking her tongue. "I'm so sorry. I should have checked. See, this is what I mean about it being hard to keep track. Here, let me throw it out. She moved toward the trash can under the sink. Don't, I said. She stopped. What? Don't throw it out. I took the can back from her hand. We can compost it, the garden. I held her gaze for a moment. Her smile had tightened at the corners. Oh, right, of course. She blinked. How responsible of you. I walked to the back door and stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. My compost bin was in the corner near the rosemary bush. I stood over it, the cold metal of the can in my hand. I did not pour it out immediately. I looked at the glossy beige contents. I read the date again. This was not a mistake. The market she frequented was high-end with high turnover. A 4-month expired can would not be on its shelf. She had brought this from her own home. She had selected it, placed it in her bag, driven it here, and opened it for me. She had told me I was forgetful. She had implied my pantry was a mess of expired goods. The back door opened. "Everything all right?" Chloe called. "Fine," I said. I tilted the can. The soup slid out with a thick, wet sound into the bin. I placed the empty can carefully beside it, lid nestled inside. I would need it later. When I went back inside, Chloe was setting the table. She used the good silver, the set Michael and I received for our wedding. She placed each piece with deliberate care. "I thought we should make it special," she said. "That's kind of you," I said. I went to the pantry and retrieved my own in-date can of soup. I opened it and added it to the stew. The action was methodical. My hands did not shake. The front door opened and David's voice called out, "Hello, smells incredible in here." He came into the kitchen, his face open and smiling. He kissed my cheek, then Chloe's. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a beast." He looked at the set table, at Chloe arranging a napkin just so. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble, Mom." "It was no trouble," I said. Chloe linked her arm with his. "Your mother and I have had a lovely time getting everything ready, haven't we?" I stirred the pot one final time. "Yes," I said, very illuminating. We sat down to eat, the stew steamed in my grandmother's ceramic bowl before me. Chloe had served me first, heaping a large portion. "The cook deserves the first taste," she had said, smiling. I looked at the bowl. I looked at her, sitting across from me, waiting. David was chatting about his day, spooning stew into his own mouth with happy appreciation. I picked up my spoon. I did not bring it to my lips. "Is something wrong, Martha?" Chloe asked, her head tilted. "Not hungry?" "Just enjoying the sight of a family meal," I said. I set my spoon down. "It's a precious thing. It requires care." David nodded, his mouth full. "Sure does," he agreed. Chloe's smile stayed fixed. She took a large, eager bite of her own stew. Chloe chewed with a satisfied expression, her eyes meeting mine over the rim of her spoon. She swallowed. "It's wonderful, Martha, as always. You really do have a gift for these classic dishes." She took another bite, larger this time. David nodded enthusiastically. "It's perfect, Mom. Tastes just like I remember." I watched her. I watched the spoon go from the bowl to her mouth again and again. My own bowl sat untouched, the steam gradually lessening. The warmth of the kitchen felt close, dense with the scent of the meal and the sharp, clean perfume Chloe always wore. "Aren't you eating?" David asked, noticing my full plate. "My stomach is a bit slow today," I said. "I'll let it settle." I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. The cold liquid was a clarity in the thick air. "Probably all the rich cooking," Chloe said lightly, not looking up from her bowl. "It can be hard on a more delicate constitution. You should try some of the simpler recipes I use. Lots of steamed vegetables. Very gentle." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. The meal continued. David talked about a project at work. Chloe made attentive noises, her focus seemingly on him, but I could feel the occasional flick of her gaze toward my still full bowl. It was a test. She was waiting to see if I would eat it. I would not. When Chloe's bowl was nearly empty, she pushed back her chair. "Let me help clear," she said, standing. She reached for my bowl first. I'm not finished, I said, my hand coming to rest on the table near the bowl's edge. Her fingers paused in midair. Oh, it's getting cold, though. I prefer it that way sometimes. She retracted her hand, a faint line appearing between her eyebrows. She picked up her own empty bowl and David's. Well, I'll just take these then. She carried them to the sink. I listened to the clatter of porcelain, the rush of water. David patted my hand. You sure you're okay, Mom? I am certain, I said. Chloe returned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. All done. Now, let's get you some dessert. I brought a lovely angel food cake from the bakery on Maple. Very light. She was already moving toward the refrigerator where she had stowed it earlier. This was the rhythm of her aggression, a series of small, helpful actions, each one underlined with a comment about age, delicacy, or forgetfulness. The expired soup was not an isolated event. It was a step in a pattern I had been too polite, too hopeful to fully acknowledge. I thought of the other moments, the time she organized my medicine cabinet, reading the labels aloud with a concerned hum. The afternoon she suggested very gently that I might not be able to handle the stairs to the attic much longer. Each instance could be explained away as clumsy kindness. Together they formed an intention. The cake was placed on the counter. She began slicing it. David, why don't you take your mother into the living room? I'll bring everything in. Good idea, David said, standing. Come on, Mom, relax for a bit. I allowed him to guide me from the kitchen. As I passed the trash can under the sink, I glanced at it. The plastic liner was clean, new. I had taken the empty soup can out to the compost, but the packaging, the cardboard label from the container of thyme, the salt box, the paper sleeve from the cake, was all in there. Evidence of her helpfulness, and among it, if one looked, would be the key piece. I sat in my armchair in the living room. David took the sofa. Through the archway, I could see Chloe's back as she arranged cake slices on small plates. Her movements were quick, efficient. She opened a drawer for forks. My mind was not on the cake. It was on the compost bin outside, and the can nestled within it. The expiration date was a fact. Her explanation was a lie. The sequence of her actions was a deliberate construction. I played it back. The offer to help, the presentation of the grocery bag, the specific selection of an item I would need that she had ensured was toxic, the performance of opening it for me, the weak old woman, the suggestion that my pantry was a graveyard of expired goods, the final gracious serving of the tainted food to me, the cook. It was a quiet domestic poisoning, not with arsenic, but with disrespect and a calculated risk to my health. And she had done it in my home, at my table, in front of my son. A coldness settled in my center, a solid, still point. The hurt was there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was being encased in something harder. This was not a matter for a discussion. David would only see a mistake, a supermarket error. He would plead for peace, for understanding. He would ask me again to be the bigger person. Chloe entered with a tray. She gave David his cake, then brought a small plate to me. Just a little piece, she cooed. I took the plate. Thank you. She sat close to David on the sofa, tucking her feet under her. She took a bite of her cake. So, David, she said, I was thinking, now that your mother is getting older, we should really look into some of those life alert systems. You know, the necklaces, for safety. David's fork hesitated. That's a thought. Mom, what do you think? I looked at the white cake on my plate. It looked like nothing. I think it's premature, I said, my voice even. It's never too early to plan, Chloe said, her tone sweetly reasonable. We just worry. You live so alone out here. I did not answer. I set the cake plate on the side table, untouched. I stood up. If you'll excuse me for a moment. I walked back to the kitchen. They were talking in low voices in the living room. I went straight to the back door and stepped outside again. The evening air was cooler now. I walked to the compost bin and lifted the lid. There it was, the empty can glinting in the fading light. I reached in and picked it up. I did not mind the dirt. I held it firmly and went back inside. At the kitchen sink, I washed the can with hot water and dish soap. I scrubbed off the remnants of soup and the soil from the compost. I dried it thoroughly with a paper towel. The label was slightly faded, but the printing was intact. Best Buy, November 2023. I turned it in my hands. It was not just a piece of trash. It was a record, a testament. I heard Chloe's laugh from the other room, a light, careless sound. I opened the cabinet under the sink. I moved aside a fresh box of trash bags. I placed the clean, dry can at the very back against the wall, where it would not be seen. I replaced the box of bags in front of it. Then I closed the cabinet door. I stood, my hands on the cool countertop. I looked at the stew pot still on the stove. I looked at the table, now clear except for the salt and pepper shakers. I looked at the doorway to the living room, from which their murmured conversation drifted. A plan, simple and clear, formed in my mind. It required no shouting, no accusation she could twist. It required only observation, timing, and a refusal to accept the poison I was served. The decision was made. The evidence was secured. The next move was hers. But the final consequence would be mine to administer. I smoothed the front of my apron. I took a deep, steadying breath. The coldness inside me was now a focused weight. I walked back to the living room doorway. They both looked up. Chloe's smile was placid, confident. "Everything all right?" David asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything is now perfectly clear." I returned to my armchair. The slice of cake sat untouched on the side table. Chloe was leaning against David on the sofa, her posture one of relaxed ownership. The conversation drifted to their recent vacation, a topic meant to highlight a world from which I was excluded. "The water was so clear, Martha," Chloe said, turning her smile toward me. "You would have loved it. So peaceful, perfect for quiet reflection." "It sounds very nice," I said. David stretched. "Well, I hate to eat and run, but I should probably get an early start on those emails. Big presentation tomorrow." He began to stand. Chloe's hand on his arm stopped him. "Oh, but you haven't had a real dinner yet. You just had stew and cake. Your mother went to all that trouble." Her eyes flicked to me. "There's plenty left, isn't there? We should have a proper second helping, a real family supper." It was a correction. My offering of stew at the kitchen table was not sufficient. She wanted a performance in the dining room. She wanted to preside. "I suppose I could eat a bit more," David said, settling back down. He was always eager to please her. "Wonderful." Chloe stood, smoothing her trousers. "Martha, you rest. I'll set up in the dining room and bring everything in. It'll be my treat." She moved into the dining room before I could object. I heard the clatter of the good china being taken from the hutch, the slide of the heavy mahogany chairs on the rug. David gave me an apologetic shrug. "She likes things just so." "I have observed that," I said. I rose and went to the kitchen. Chloe was transferring the stew from the pot into my grandmother's large porcelain tureen. She ladled it with care, ensuring no spillage. She did not look at me. "I can manage the rest, Chloe," I said. "Nonsense. You've done enough." She picked up the tureen, cradling it like a trophy. "Could you bring the bread basket and the butter and the water pitcher?" I collected the items. We carried them into the dining room. She had lit the 2 candlesticks in the center of the table. The overhead chandelier was off, leaving the room in a pool of warm, flickering light. It was a scene she had staged. The perfect family matriarch serving a perfect meal. She placed the tureen at the head of the table where David would sit. David came in, smiling at the sight. "Wow, you really went all out." "For my 2 favorite people," Chloe said, her voice soft. She picked up the ladle. "Now, Martha, as our honored guest, you go first." She moved to the seat at David's right hand, the place usually reserved for the guest of honor, and held the ladle poised over an empty bowl. It was a masterful piece of theater. The generous daughter-in-law serving the elderly mother first, it cemented her role as the gracious host in my home. It also ensured I received the first scoop from the tureen, the same tureen into which the expired soup had been stirred. I took my seat. "Thank you, dear." She ladled a generous portion into my bowl. The rich aroma of thyme and beef rose with the steam. She then served David and finally herself, taking an even larger portion. She placed the tureen back on the table and sat at David's left, directly across from me. "This looks incredible," David said, picking up his spoon. "Wait," Chloe said, placing a hand on his wrist. She bowed her head. "A blessing, for the food and for family." We bowed our heads. David followed suit. I kept my eyes open, watching the candle flames waver. She said a short, generic prayer ending with, "And bless the hands that prepared it." We raised our heads. David immediately began to eat. Chloe watched me, her spoon in her hand, her expression one of expectant benevolence. I looked down at my bowl. I picked up my spoon. I lifted a small amount of broth, but did not bring it to my mouth. "It is very hot," I said. "I'll let it cool." "Of course," she said, her smile unwavering. She began to eat her own stew with apparent relish. David's right. It's exactly as he remembers. The meal proceeded. David ate with hearty enjoyment. Chloe ate steadily, complimenting the flavor, the tenderness of the meat. I stirred my stew, letting the steam escape. I took occasional sips of water. "You're really not hungry, are you, Mom?" David asked, concern finally cutting through his contentment. "It's the cooking," Chloe said sympathetically. "Sometimes the cook has no appetite, all that smelling and tasting beforehand." She took another bite. "It's a common thing." I saw my moment. My water glass was nearly full. As I reached for it, my elbow caught the rim. The glass tipped, spilling cold water across the polished table and directly into my lap. I stood up quickly. "Oh, how clumsy." David jumped up. "Here, let me get a towel." He hurried toward the kitchen. Chloe rose halfway from her seat, a look of irritation flashing across her face before she composed it into concern. "Are you all right? Let me help." She began dabbing at the table with her napkin, her attention on the spreading pool of water. "It's quite all right," I said, stepping back from the table. My chair was between Chloe and myself. "I believe I have a spill on my sleeve as well." I lifted my arm, drawing her eye. While her focus was on my gesture, and with David still in the kitchen, I moved. It took less than 2 seconds. I picked up my bowl of untouched, cooling stew. I placed it on the table where Chloe's bowl had been. I picked up her bowl, still half full and warm from her eating, and placed it before my chair. I then picked up my napkin from the floor where it had fallen. When David returned with a dish towel, I was blotting my sleeve, standing by my chair. "Here, Mom." He handed me the towel. He looked at the wet table. "I'll get more." "No need," Chloe said, her napkin sodden. "It's fine. Let's just finish before it gets completely cold." She sat down, not glancing at her bowl. She picked up her spoon and resumed eating, taking a large mouthful from what was now, technically, my original portion. David sat back down, looking between us. "Sure you're okay?" "I am perfectly fine," I said, taking my seat. I looked at the bowl now in front of me, Chloe's bowl containing the stew she had been eating from since the start of the meal. I picked up my clean spoon. I took a small, deliberate bite. It was warm, flavorful, and perfectly safe. Chloe continued to eat from the bowl I had given her, the one that had sat cooling and untouched before me. She ate with the confidence of a victor, unaware that the victory had just been silently transferred. The rest of the dinner passed with quiet conversation. David talked. Chloe interjected with sweet comments. I answered when required. My mind was calm, a clear pool. The deed was done. The mechanism was set. All that remained was to wait for the natural consequence to unfold. When Chloe finished her last spoonful, she sighed with contentment. "I'm stuffed." That was so satisfying. She leaned back in her chair, a hand resting lightly on her stomach. a smile of pure, unguarded triumph on her face as she looked at me. She sat back with that smile of triumph, her hand resting lightly on her midsection. The candles flickered, casting moving shadows across her pleased expression. David pushed his own empty bowl away. "I couldn't eat another bite," he said. "That was fantastic, Mom. Thank you." "It was my pleasure," I said. I had eaten perhaps a third of the stew now in front of me. It was adequate. Chloe let out a small, soft sigh. "I think I overdid it. It was just so good." She shifted in her chair. A minute passed. The only sounds were the faint crackle of the candles and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Chloe's smile began to stiffen. She cleared her throat. "Something wrong, honey?" David asked. No, just a little full." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes, which had been bright with victory, took on a slightly glassy quality. She shifted again, this time with more discomfort. Her hand pressed a little more firmly against her stomach. I took a slow sip of water. I watched her. "You look pale," David said, leaning forward. "It's the candlelight," Chloe said, but her voice had lost its melodic ease. It was tighter. "I'm fine." Another minute. She drew in a breath, then let it out slowly. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on her upper lip. She dabbed at it with her napkin, her movements quick and nervous. "Chloe?" David's voice was edged with concern now. "I just need to stand up for a second." She pushed her chair back. The legs scraped loudly on the floor. She stood, one hand braced on the table. Her knuckles were white. She took a step, then paused, her body going very still. A low, involuntary groan escaped her. "Whoa!" David was on his feet instantly. "What is it?" "My stomach," she managed to say. The words were clipped. "It's cramping, quite badly." Her face had lost all its color. The carefully applied blush stood out in two stark circles on her ashen cheeks. "Maybe you ate too fast," David said, reaching for her arm. She flinched away from his touch. "Don't. It's sharp." She bent slightly at the waist, hugging her arms around herself. Her breathing became shallow, rapid pants. Something isn't right." I remained seated. I placed my spoon neatly in my bowl. "Perhaps it's indigestion," I said. "Rich food can sometimes disagree." She shot me a look, but it was blurred with pain. "It's not indigestion. It's like a knife." A violent tremor went through her. She gasped, her eyes widening. "I think I'm going to be sick." She stumbled away from the table, one hand clamped over her mouth. She made it to the hallway before we heard the first retch, followed by a choked, desperate sound. Then the quick, stumbling footsteps toward the guest bathroom. The door slammed shut. David stood frozen in the dining room, his face a mask of shock. The sounds from down the hall were unmistakable and distressing. He turned to me, his eyes wide. "Mom, what's happening?" "It would appear she is unwell," I said. I stood up and began to gather the bowls. I picked up David's, then my own. I reached for Chloe's bowl, the one she had eaten from, now empty, save for a few streaks of gravy. "Shouldn't we call a doctor?" David asked, his gaze darting toward the hallway. "Let's assess the situation first," I said. My voice was calm, practical. Food poisoning often presents this way. It passes. I carried the stack of bowls into the kitchen. I set David's and mine in the sink. I held Chloe's bowl separately. From the bathroom, we heard the toilet flush, followed by a weak, miserable sob, then another round of retching. David followed me into the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. "This is so sudden. She was fine a minute ago." "The onset can be rapid," I said. I turned on the hot water at the sink. I took the sponge and began to wash Chloe's bowl. I washed it thoroughly, inside and out. I rinsed it until it squeaked under my fingers. I dried it with a clean towel. I opened the cabinet and put it away with the other matching bowls. David watched me, his confusion deepening. "You're doing the dishes now?" "It's better to clean up," I said. I wiped the counter with a methodical back-and-forth motion. The sounds from the bathroom had subsided into a strained silence, punctuated by the sound of running water. Then the bathroom door opened. Chloe emerged, clinging to the doorframe. She looked ravaged. Her makeup was smeared. Her hair was damp at the temples. She was trembling. "David," she whispered, her voice hoarse, I need to lie down." He rushed to her, putting an arm around her shoulders. She leaned heavily against him, moaning as another cramp visibly seized her. "It's getting worse," she gasped. "It's not stopping." He helped her into the living room, lowering her onto the sofa. She curled onto her side, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her abdomen. Her breathing was ragged. "It hurts," she whimpered, a tear tracking through the ruin of her foundation. "It really hurts." David knelt beside her, helpless. He looked back at me, standing in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, what did you put in that stew?" His question hung in the air. It was not an accusation yet, but the seed was there. Fear was making him grasp for a cause, and the most immediate cause was my cooking. I met his gaze. I used the same ingredients I always use. My tone was factual. Beef, vegetables, broth, thyme, a can of cream of mushroom soup. Chloe let out another pained groan, burrowing her face into a cushion. "The soup," she mumbled, her voice muffled. Then she lifted her head, her eyes finding me with a sudden, feverish clarity. A new thought seemed to strike her through the pain, a calculated, dangerous thought. Her expression shifted from suffering to something more focused. She looked at David, then back at me. The accusation was forming behind her eyes, but she was too ill to voice it fully. She swallowed hard, a new wave of nausea contorting her features. She closed her eyes, defeated for the moment by her own body's revolt. I turned and walked back to the kitchen sink. I filled the kettle with fresh water and set it on the stove to boil. The ordinary ritual of making tea was a necessary anchor. The consequence had arrived, just as I knew it would. The next phase was about to begin. I selected a chamomile tea bag from the canister. The quiet click of the gas igniting under the kettle was a small, definitive sound in the tense silence of the house. The whistle of the kettle was a sharp, clean sound in the heavy silence. I had just poured the hot water over the chamomile tea bag when I heard the front door open and close, the sound of a key in the lock. David was already here, of course. But this was different. This was the sound of someone leaving and returning. Footsteps hurried down the hall. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a small paper bag from the all-night pharmacy. His face was flushed, his hair wind-tossed. He must have run to the car and back. "I got some anti-nausea stuff and electrolytes," he said, his voice rushed. He looked past me into the living room. "How is she?" Before I could answer, a low, miserable moan came from the sofa. Chloe had been quiet for a few minutes, but the pain was evidently cyclical. The sound was one of genuine distress. David's eyes widened. He moved quickly past me. "Chloe? Honey, I'm back." I lifted the tea bag from my mug, placed it on the saucer, and added a small spoon of honey. I stirred slowly. The liquid swirled, amber and clear. From the living room, I heard David's lowered voice, soothing. Then Chloe's voice, thinned by sickness and something else, a rising pitch of anger. "She did something," I heard her say, the words slurred but distinct. "She did this." I took a sip of my tea. It was the correct temperature, soothing. David's response was a murmur. Then his footsteps came back toward the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway again, the pharmacy bag dangling from his hand. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes beyond concern. It was a flicker of assessment, of doubt. "She says it's food poisoning," he said. His tone was neutral, testing. "It certainly appears to be," I agreed, taking another sip. "She says it came on right after dinner, immediately. That is often the case with foodborne illness," I said. "The timing is consistent." He stared at me. My calmness was now a provocation. A mother should be fluttering, worried, offering remedies, sharing his alarm. My steady hands around the mug, my measured responses, were out of sync with the crisis. He took a step into the kitchen. His eyes scanned the counters, the clean sink, the stove. They landed on the dish rack. In it was the large stew pot washed and upside down on the drying mat. Next to it, the ladle. Next to that, the porcelain bowl from which I had eaten my portion of stew. It was clean, sparkling. He looked from the clean bowl to me. "You did the dishes." "I cleaned the cooking pot, yes, and my bowl. But not—" He trailed off, his gaze shifting back toward the living room where Chloe was. He meant her bowl, the bowl she had used. "Chloe's bowl is already put away," I said. I gestured with my chin toward the cabinet. "I washed it earlier." His brow furrowed. The sequence bothered him. Why wash one specific bowl so promptly? In his mind, a suspicious picture began to form, a hurried cleansing of the implement of crime. His voice dropped, though Chloe could likely still hear. "Mom, tell me what happened. Exactly." I held his gaze. We ate dinner. Chloe became ill. That is what happened. Another groan from the sofa. "David!" Chloe's call was weak but sharp with insistence. He turned his head toward her, then back to me. The conflict was alive in his face now, the man caught between. She's suggesting you might have used something bad, spoiled." I did not move. All the ingredients were fresh. You saw me cooking. "Except the soup," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "The can she brought. You said it was expired." "It was. I did not use it. I composted it, as I told you. I used my own from the pantry." My voice was a flat recitation of facts. He blinked, trying to piece it together. The expired can was discarded. The stew was made with good ingredients. So how could it cause this? Unless... The thought visibly dawned on him, dark and unwelcome. Unless his mother was not telling the full truth. Unless the can had been used after all. Chloe's voice cut through again, stronger now, fueled by misery and a growing certainty. Ask her what she really put in it." David's jaw tightened. He was not a confrontational man. He preferred easy peace. But the scene before him was forcing a choice, his wife's visceral suffering or his mother's implacable calm. The physical evidence seemed to side with the sufferer. "Mom," he said, and his voice was harder, "I need you to be straight with me. This is serious. She's really sick." I placed my mug on the counter. The click of ceramic on granite was a small, final sound. "I am being perfectly straight, David. The food was fine. I ate it myself." I gestured to the clean bowl in the rack. "I feel perfectly well." It was the wrong thing to say. It sounded like a challenge. It sounded like proof of my own immunity, and therefore, my guilt. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the clean bowl, symbol of my well-being, and then toward the living room where his wife was curled in pain. The wrong conclusion crystallized in his gaze. He didn't say it aloud, but I saw it. He believed I had done something. He believed I had made Chloe sick and taken care to protect myself. He took a step backward away from me. The distance was more than physical. "I'm taking her home," he said, his voice formal, cold. "She needs to be in her own bed." "That is probably for the best," I said. He turned and walked back to the living room. I heard him speaking softly to Chloe, helping her sit up. She whimpered, then said, loud enough for me to hear, "I want to get out of this house." I remained in the kitchen. I finished my tea. I listened to the sounds of them gathering her things, the rustle of her jacket, David's supportive murmurs. I looked at the cabinet under the sink. The evidence was there, waiting, but the time for revealing it was not now. Now was the time for him to sit with his wrong conclusion. Now was the time for the wound of his doubt to fester. The revelation would come, but it would come with greater force after he had committed to his suspicion. They appeared in the hallway, David supporting Chloe, who was hunched and pale, her face averted from me. As they passed the kitchen doorway on the way to the front door, David paused. He did not look at me. He looked at the floor. "We're leaving," he said. "Drive safely," I replied. And then they were gone. The front door closed with a solid thud. The house was silent again, save for the faint tick of the clock on the wall. I stood in the bright, clean kitchen, alone. The first part was over. The accusation had been born in his mind. The next part would require him to voice it, and then I would provide the answer. The silence after the door closed was complete. I finished my tea and washed the mug. I wiped down the counters once more, though they were already clean. I checked the lock on the back door. I moved through the familiar empty rooms, turning off lights. The dining room still held the scent of the meal and the burned-out candles. I blew out the stubs and opened a window a crack to let in the cool night air. I knew he would come back. It was not even an hour later when I heard a car pull into the driveway. The engine cut off. A single door opened and closed. Footsteps approached the front porch, heavier and slower than before. The doorbell rang, a single firm press. I was in the living room, in my armchair, a book open on my lap. I had not been reading. I placed the book on the side table and went to the door. David stood on the porch, alone. His jacket was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled up haphazardly. His face was drawn, exhausted, and set in lines of grim resolution. The flicker of doubt I had seen earlier had hardened into something more solid. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was low and rough. "Come in," I said, stepping back. He walked past me into the living room, but did not sit. He stood in the center of the rug, his back to the empty fireplace. He turned to face me as I took my seat again. He remained standing, a judge awaiting a statement. "How is Chloe?" I asked. "Sleeping. The medication finally kicked in." He crossed his arms over his chest. The doctor said it was acute gastroenteritis, likely from something she ate. I nodded. "I'm glad she's resting." His eyes narrowed. "Mom, stop, just stop." The words burst out of him, strained. "We're past polite questions. She's sick, really sick, and she says it's from the food here." I said nothing. I waited. "She says she thinks you used that expired soup." He forced the words out as if saying them made the accusation more real. "She says you were angry about the comments she made, about her trying to help." "I see," I said. "Is it true?" The question hung between us, stark and ugly. Is what true, David? That I was angry, or that I used the expired soup? "Both," he said, his voice rising. "Either. She said you were cold to her all night, that you switched the bowls around, that you did something." "I did switch the bowls," I said plainly. He flinched as if I'd struck him. His arms dropped to his sides. "What?" "When I spilled the water, I switched my bowl for hers. It was a simple maneuver." He stared at me, his mind trying to catch up. "Why? Why would you do that?" "I thought her portion looked more appealing," I said. It was not the full truth, but it was a factual statement about my motivation in that second. He shook his head, rejecting it. "No, that doesn't make sense. That's not what she said." He was grappling with two conflicting stories. "She said you gave her the bad food on purpose. She said you poisoned her." The word fell into the quiet room like a stone. Poison. It was a dramatic, dangerous word. It shifted the scale from a domestic slight to a criminal act. I looked at my son. His face was a map of anguish. He wanted me to deny it vehemently, to be outraged, to provide an easy explanation that would absolve everyone and restore the peace. I did not provide that. "I served her the food that was on her plate," I said, my voice level. "The same food she served to me. But if you switch the bowls, then the food on her plate was originally yours," he said, logic breaking through his distress. "The food you didn't eat." "Correct." He paced a short, tight circle. So you're saying the food you were going to eat made her sick? So it was bad, and you knew it, and you gave it to her." He stopped, pointing a finger at me, his hand trembling. That's deliberate. That's what she's saying." He had arrived at the truth, but from the wrong direction. He believed I had prepared bad food, intended it for myself, then maliciously given it to Chloe. He did not yet see the origin point. "I did not prepare bad food, David," I said, each word separate and clear. "Then how do you explain what happened?" he demanded, throwing his hands up. "She's violently ill. I saw it. You didn't eat yours, and you're fine. You washed the bowl. How does that look?" "It looks," I said slowly, "exactly as you have described." He let out a frustrated breath. "Mom, I need a real answer. I need you to tell me you didn't do this. Look me in the eye and tell me you didn't make my wife sick." I met his gaze. I held it. "I did not make your wife sick with any intent of my own." It was a lawyer's answer, a careful answer. It was not the blanket denial he craved. His shoulders slumped. He saw the evasion. To him, it was confirmation. "I don't understand," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "Why would you? Over some stupid comments? Over her trying to help?" He still could not see it. He could not see the expired can for what it was, not a mistake, but a weapon. He could only see the final dramatic result and my calmness in its wake. He saw a spiteful old woman and a suffering young wife. The narrative was complete in his mind, and my refusal to loudly defend myself was the final piece of evidence against me. "You should go back to her," I said. "She needs you." He looked at me with a mixture of betrayal and profound disappointment. It was the look he'd given me as a teenager when I'd enforced a punishment he thought was unfair. But this was not about a missed curfew. "Yeah," he said, his voice hollow. "I should." He turned and walked back to the front door. He paused with his hand on the knob. He did not look back. "I don't know what to do with this, Mom." Then he was gone again. I sat in the chair for a long time. The accusation was now spoken aloud. The charge of poisoning, however misinterpreted, was on the table. The next step was no longer mine to initiate. It was his. He would have to choose to press the issue, to demand a fuller accounting. And when he did, I would be ready. The evidence was waiting, clean and dry under the sink. The truth was simple. She had served me expired food. I had served it back. But for him to hear that truth, he first had to believe in the possibility of her crime. His mind was now cracked open enough to let that possibility in. It was a start. He did not make me wait long. The phone rang early the next morning, just after 7. The sun was bright through the kitchen window. I had already been awake for hours. I answered on the second ring. "Good morning, David." There was a pause. He had not expected such a normal greeting. His voice was thick, weary. "How did you know it was me?" "Who else would it be?" I said. Another pause. I could hear background sounds, a coffee machine, the soft murmur of a television. He was at home. Chloe was likely still sleeping, or pretending to sleep. "We need to finish our conversation," he said. The formal tone was back, but it was frayed at the edges. The night had worn him down. "I agree," I said. "I'm coming over. Now. I'll put the coffee on." 20 minutes later, he was at the table in the breakfast nook. He looked older. Stubble darkened his jaw. He cradled the mug of coffee I placed before him, but did not drink. He stared into the dark liquid. I sat across from him with my own mug. I waited. "She's better," he said finally, not looking up. "The worst is past. She's weak, but she's keeping down water." "I'm glad to hear it." His eyes lifted to mine. They were bloodshot. "She hasn't changed her story. She says you did it on purpose. She says she's afraid of you now." I took a sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter. "What do you believe, David?" He shook his head. A quick, frustrated motion. I don't know what to believe. I saw her. I saw how sick she was, and I saw you washing that bowl, being so calm. It doesn't add up to nothing. It adds up to something, I said, but you have the equation backward. Then give me the right one, he said, his voice cracking. Stop talking in circles. Just tell me what happened. From the beginning. This was the moment. The demand for a full accounting. I set my mug down. Very well, I said. I stood up. I walked to the sink. I knelt and opened the cabinet door. I moved the box of trash bags aside. I reached into the dark space at the back and my fingers closed around the cool, smooth metal of the soup can. I pulled it out. I carried it back to the table. I did not hand it to him. I placed it on the polished wood between us, directly in his line of sight. It sat there clean and ordinary, a simple piece of domestic trash. He stared at it, confused. What is this? Look at it. He picked it up. He turned it in his hands. He saw the label. His eyes scanned it, then stopped. He found the date. His thumb rubbed over the printed numbers. Best Buy, November 2023. He looked from the can to me, his confusion deepening. This is the expired can? It is. You said you composted it. I composted the contents. I kept the can. Why? For proof, I said. Proof of what? That you had an expired can? He was still not seeing it. Proof that it was here. Proof that it was opened. Proof of the sequence of events. My voice remained even, instructional. Chloe brought this can with her. She presented it as a helpful grocery item. She insisted on opening it herself. She told me my pantry was likely full of expired goods. She then served me the first portion of stew from the tureen into which this had been stirred. David's face was blank, processing. But you said you didn't use it. You said you used your own. I did not use it in the cooking, I said. I added my own in-date can to the pot. But Chloe believed she had successfully fed me the expired product. She believed the first ladle from the tureen, which she served to me, contained the soup from this can. He set the can down. It made a soft click on the wood. What are you saying? I am saying her act was intentional, David. She did not make a grocery error. She brought a specific expired ingredient, opened it, and ensured it was incorporated with the intent that I would consume it. It was a calculated action meant to humiliate me and potentially make me ill, all under the guise of a mistake. He shook his head slowly, a reflexive denial. No, that's... She wouldn't. Why? You would have to ask her that, but the evidence is in your hand. A 4-month expired can from her home, opened in my kitchen, presented as fresh. He looked at the can again, then back at me. The first crack in his certainty appeared. But you didn't eat it. You said you switched the bowls. Yes, when I spilled the water, I switched my full, untouched bowl, the one she had served me, believing it to be tainted, with her own bowl, from which she had already eaten safely. She then finished the meal, consuming what she had intended for me. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. I watched the understanding dawn on his face. It was not a single moment, but a slow, sickening unspooling. His eyes went distant, replaying the dinner. The offered help, the comments about my age and forgetfulness, the insistence on serving me first, his wife's smug satisfaction, followed by her violent illness. He put a hand over his mouth. His breath hitched. Oh, God. She served me the expired food, David, I said, my voice quiet and final. I simply served it back. The sentence hung in the air. It was not an excuse. It was not a justification. It was a statement of cause and effect. A reflection. He dropped his hand. His face had paled. He looked at the can with new eyes, not as a piece of trash, but as a weapon. His wife's weapon. You knew, he whispered. You knew all along. I knew when I read the date. I knew when I saw her face. I knew what she was doing. And you didn't say anything." His voice was hollow. "What would I have said? You would have called it a misunderstanding. You would have asked me again to be the bigger person. This way, the consequence was direct, and the evidence was preserved." He pushed his chair back from the table as if needing to get away from the object between us. He stood up, turning his back to me, one hand braced on the counter. His shoulders were rigid. I could see the tremor in his arm. The truth was now his. He could not unknow it. The story he had believed, the spiteful mother, the victimized wife, was shattered. In its place was a much uglier, more intimate betrayal. His wife had tried to poison his mother with neglect and contempt, and his mother had turned the trap inward on the trapper. He turned around. His eyes were wet. "Why didn't you tell me? Before?" "You weren't ready to see it," I said. "You had to see the result first. You had to believe I was capable of malice. Only then could you believe she was." He flinched. He had indeed believed I was capable. The shame of that belief now washed over him, mixed with the horror of what Chloe had done. He had no words. The foundation of his domestic life had cracked, and he was standing in the fissure. I did not move to comfort him. The comfort would have to come later, from a new understanding. For now, he needed to feel the full, unsoftened weight of the truth. The can sat on the table between us, a small silver-plated testament to the poison that had been in his house all along, and he had never tasted it. He stood with his back to me for a long minute, his hand gripping the edge of the counter. His breathing was audible, a ragged control. I did not speak. The truth was settling into the room like fine dust, covering every familiar surface with a new, grim film. When he turned, his face was different. The confusion was gone. In its place was a raw, pained clarity. He looked at the can on the table, then at me. His eyes were no longer pleading, they were seeing. "All those times," he said, his voice low and rough, "the comments, the little helps." He blinked, as if watching a series of images flash behind his eyes. "Reorganizing your medicines, talking about stair lifts, the Life Alert necklace." He said the words slowly, testing each one for its newly revealed meaning. "I told you she was just awkward, that she didn't mean it. I asked you to be patient." "You did," I confirmed. He ran both hands over his face, pressing hard. "And you were always patient." He dropped his hands. His expression was one of dawning horror at his own blindness. "She was chipping away at you, and I was handing her the hammer." "You wanted peace," I said. "It was not an absolution." "I wanted the easy way," he corrected, his voice thick with self-disgust. "I didn't want to see it because seeing it would have meant doing something, having a hard conversation, making a choice." He looked at the can again. "But this isn't a snide comment. This is," he struggled for the word. "Premeditated," I supplied. He nodded, a sharp jerk of his head. "She brought that from our house. She planned it. She wanted you to get sick. She wanted to prove you were a forgetful old woman who couldn't take care of herself." The full ugliness of it was now articulate in his mind. And then she would have been the hero, taking care of you, maybe even suggesting professional care. The logical end of her path lay before him, clear and chilling. I had seen it for months. He was only now arriving at the destination. He picked up his car keys from the table where he'd tossed them. He gripped them tightly in his fist. "I have to go." "To her?" "Yes." His jaw was set. "I have to look at her. I have to ask her, and I have to see if she lies to my face." "She will," I said. It was a prediction, not a guess. He met my eyes. For the first time, there was no doubt in his gaze about that. "I know." He walked to the door. He paused, his shoulders slumped under the weight of what he was about to do. "I am so sorry, Mom, for not seeing it, for not protecting you, for ever thinking, even for a second, that you could—" He couldn't finish the sentence. That I could be cruel. That I could poison. The thought entered your mind because the evidence pointed that way, I said. I allowed it to point that way. I needed you to follow the trail to its real source. He shook his head, not accepting the logic as comfort. It shouldn't have been there to follow. He opened the door. The morning light streamed in, outlining him. I'll be back. He left. I did not expect him to return quickly. A reckoning takes time. I cleared the table. I washed the 2 coffee mugs. I put the soup can back in its place under the sink. It had served its purpose. The hours passed quietly. I tended to my garden. I read. I did not wonder what was happening in their modern, sleek condo. I could imagine it well enough. The confrontation, the denials, the tears. Chloe's, this time. Not of pain, but of panic. The presentation of the evidence. The unraveling of her careful fiction. David's anger, so long suppressed in the name of peace, finally finding its true and rightful target. It was late afternoon when his car returned. I saw it from the living room window. He got out alone. His movements were slower, weighted. He came to the door and I opened it before he could knock. He looked exhausted, emptied out. But the grim clarity was still there. "Come in," I said. He followed me to the kitchen. He sat at the same chair. I did not offer coffee. He spoke first. I showed her the can. His voice was flat, drained of emotion. She denied it, of course. Said it was a mistake, that she must have picked it up from the back of our pantry without looking. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Then she said you planted it, that you must have taken it from our recycling to frame her. I said nothing. This was his story to tell. I asked her why she opened it herself, why she made such a point of it. She said she was just being helpful. He looked up at me. Her story was full of holes. She couldn't keep it straight. She cried. She got angry. She said I was choosing you over her, that I always did. He fell silent for a moment, studying the grain of the wood table. And then I asked her the real question. I asked her if she wanted my mother to get sick. I asked her if she thought for 1 second that serving expired food to a 68-year-old woman was acceptable, even as a mistake. He paused, swallowing hard. She didn't answer. She just looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw it. Not regret for the action, but fury that she'd been caught, that her plan had twisted back on her. That's when I knew, without any doubt, that you were right. It was all intentional. The final piece of his belief slotted into place. It was a quiet, devastating sound. "What now?" I asked. He spread his hands. "I don't know. She's at her sister's. I told her not to come back until we figure out what this means." He looked at me, lost. "How do you come back from this? How do you share a home with someone who tried to hurt your mother?" It was not my question to answer. I remained silent. "I told her there would be conditions," he continued, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Counseling. For her. For us. A real, genuine apology to you, one that acknowledges what she did, not as a mistake, but as a choice. And a change. A real one." He was outlining the boundaries he had never drawn before. It was a start. "And if she refuses?" I asked. He met my gaze. The son who always sought the path of least resistance was gone. In his place was a man staring at a hard road. "Then she refuses," he said simply. "Some lines, once you see them, you can't uncross." He stood up. He came around the table and, hesitantly, put his arms around me. It was an awkward hug, freighted with guilt and sorrow and a new, grim resolve. I patted his back. "I have to go," he murmured. "I have a lot to think about." I walked him to the door. As he stepped out, he turned. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, David." He drove away. I closed the door. The house was quiet again, but the silence was different. It was not the silence of loneliness or of tension. It was the silence after a storm has passed, when the air is clear and the damage is visible, and the long work of assessment and repair can finally begin. The quiet after David left was a different quality than before. It was not waiting. The crisis had crested and broken. What remained was the debris and the clear space where the water had receded. I went to the dining room. The candles from the night before were still on the table, their wax pooled and hardened in the holders. I picked them up and carried them to the utility drawer for cleaning later. I opened the windows wider to let the last of the evening air circulate. The room still faintly held the memory of the meal, the scent of thyme and beef now overlaid with the waxy smell of extinguished candles. I returned to the kitchen. I took the soup can from under the sink. I held it for a moment, then dropped it into the regular kitchen trash. Its purpose was served. It was evidence only if someone needed convincing. David no longer needed convincing. It was just a piece of metal now. I washed the few dishes from the day, my lunch plate, a glass. I wiped down the counters again. The routine was calming, a reassertion of order. My house was mine again, not a battleground. The silence was mine. The phone did not ring that evening. I did not expect it to. David was in the eye of his own storm. He needed to sit with his decisions, with the wreckage of his marriage's previous foundation. Any call from me would be an intrusion, a pull toward one side. He had to find his balance alone. The next morning passed quietly. I tended to my roses. The late spring blooms were just beginning. I clipped a few deadheads, my hands moving by habit. The sun was warm on my back. The ordinary beauty of the garden was a stark contrast to the ugliness that had visited my kitchen. It was a relief. In the early afternoon, I saw his car. He pulled into the driveway slowly. He sat inside for a minute before getting out. He walked to the door, his steps measured. He carried a small white bakery box. I opened the door. He looked exhausted, but less shattered than the day before. There was a grim resolution in the set of his shoulders. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, David." I stepped back to let him in. He went to the kitchen and placed the box on the table. "I brought bear claws from that place you like downtown." "Thank you. That's thoughtful." He didn't sit. He stood by the table, his hands in his pockets. "Chloe is still at her sister's. We talked on the phone this morning." I waited. "She's not agreeing to counseling. She says it's unnecessary. She says it was a misunderstanding that everyone is blowing out of proportion. She says if I choose to believe the worst of her, then maybe we have bigger problems." He recited the points flatly, as if reading from a list. "She wants to come home and pretend it never happened." "And you?" I asked. He looked out the window toward the garden. "I can't," he said, the two words simple and final. "I can't pretend. I see it now, all of it. The way she's treated you, the contempt. I let it go on because it was easier than a fight. But I can't unsee it, and I can't live with someone who would do what she did and then call it nothing." He turned to face me. "I told her she needs to stay at her sister's for now, that I need time, that we may need to make more permanent arrangements." The words hung in the air. They were not a decision but an acknowledgement of a possible end. "I am sorry," I said, and I was. Not for Chloe's exposure, but for my son's pain. He nodded, accepting the sympathy but not lingering on it. "I'm the one who's sorry, Mom. I failed you. I was so busy trying to keep my marriage peaceful that I let her make my family home a place of quiet war. I should have protected you. I should have seen it." "You see it now?" "I do." He finally pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. He opened the bakery box. The pastries inside looked perfect, flaky and dusted with sugar. He didn't take one. "It changes everything. Not just with her, with me." That was the real consequence. Not just a strained marriage, but a changed son. The man who avoided conflict had been forced into a war, and he had chosen a side. The cost of that choice was still being tallied. "What will you do?" I asked, sitting across from him. "I'll see a lawyer, just to understand options. I'll give her time, but I don't think she's capable of the apology you deserve." a real one. She's only capable of being sorry she got caught." He looked at me, his eyes clear and weary. "I don't know if our marriage can survive that. I don't know if I want it to." We sat in silence for a while. The scent of baked sugar filled the kitchen. "I want you to know," he said, his voice firming, "that you are welcome here in my life, always, and that I will never again let anyone disrespect you in my presence. That's a promise." It was the promise I had needed, not the apology from Chloe. It was the boundary, finally erected. "Thank you, David." He stayed for an hour. We did not talk much more about Chloe or the future. We ate the pastries. They were slightly too sweet, but the gesture was genuine. He told me about his work, about a project that was going well. It was normal talk, but the normalcy was fragile, a thin layer over the new reality. When he left, he hugged me again, less awkwardly this time. "I'll call you tomorrow." "I'll be here." I closed the door. I cleared the table, disposing of the bakery box and the crumbs. I washed the 2 plates. The house was clean, orderly, silent. The storm had passed. The landscape was altered. My son's life was in upheaval. My relationship with him was scarred but fundamentally changed, perhaps for the better. There was no victory in it, only a harsh, clean truth. The poison was out. The wound was open. Now we would see what would heal and what would not. A week passed. The days settled into a new rhythm. The phone calls from David were regular, not about Chloe, but about ordinary things. The weather, a movie he'd seen, a problem with his car he needed advice on. The conversations were careful, but the carefulness was now born of respect, not avoidance. On Saturday morning, I was in the garden again. The sky was clear, the air cool and clean. I heard a car, but I did not look up. I was pruning the lavender, the sharp scent releasing with each cut. Footsteps on the gravel path. I turned. It was David. He was alone. He held a paper bag from the same bakery. He looked better, rested. The grimness had softened into a quiet resolve. "Morning, Mom." "Good morning." "Good." I wiped my hands on my gardening apron. "I brought coffee, too," he said, lifting the bag. "And some of those cheese Danish things you like." "That's very kind." We went inside. He set out the pastries and poured coffee from a thermos into 2 mugs he took from my cabinet. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where the can had sat a week before. He took a sip of coffee, then set his mug down deliberately. "I met with a lawyer on Thursday." I nodded, waiting. "It's just preliminary, to understand the process." He looked at me. "Chloe is still at her sister's. We've spoken a few times. She's not changing her position. She believes she's the victim of a misunderstanding and my overreaction." He said the word without heat, as a simple fact. I told her that until she can fully acknowledge what she did, not as a mistake, but as a deliberate, cruel act, and until she offers a genuine apology to you, I cannot consider reconciliation. He was stating his terms. They were non-negotiable. "How did she respond?" I asked. "She said I was being manipulated, that you had turned me against her." He shook his head slowly. "A week ago that might have worked. It might have made me doubt. But now I just see it as another attempt to avoid responsibility. It clarifies things." He took a deep breath. "Mom, I need to apologize to you, not just for last week, for the years before that." I started to speak, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me say this. I've been practicing." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "I was a coward. I saw the little cuts she made, the comments about your age, your memory, your old-fashioned ways. I heard them, and I told myself they were harmless. I told myself she was just trying to help in her own clumsy way. I told you to be patient. I asked you to be the bigger person. I prioritized my own comfort, my desire for a quiet life, over your dignity. I allowed your home to become a place where you were subtly undermined. I failed as a son." His words were clear, rehearsed, and utterly sincere. They did not falter. This was not a rushed, guilt-driven apology. It was an accounting. When she brought that can, he continued, and you got sick, I would have believed it was your fault. I would have believed you were becoming forgetful. I would have let her use that incident to push for more help, more control. That's the path we were on, and I was walking right beside her, blindfolded. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. You didn't just switch a bowl, Mom. You switched on a light, a harsh one, and you made me look at what was really in the room. It was the hardest thing anyone has ever done for me, but it was necessary. So, I am sorry for my blindness, for my silence, and forever, for 1 second thinking you capable of the malice that was in her heart. The kitchen was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I felt the weight of his words, the clean pain of them. There was no defense he was seeking, no easy absolution. He was stating facts about his own failure. Thank you, David, I said. I accept your apology. He let out a long breath, as if he had been holding it for years. Some of the tension left his shoulders. But, I said, and he looked up, attentive, my forgiveness is not permission. It does not mean things return to how they were. I will not again be silent for the sake of your peace. My dignity is not negotiable. You are my son, and I love you. But I am not a project to be managed or a problem to be solved. I am your mother. That requires a certain respect, one you now understand. He nodded, his expression serious. I do understand, and I will earn that respect back, through my actions, not just my words. I believe you will, I said. We finished our coffee. We ate the pastries. The conversation turned to other things. He helped me repot a fern that had outgrown its container. His hands, so like his father's, worked carefully in the soil. There was no rush to leave. The visit was not a duty, it was a choice. When it was time for him to go, he washed his hands at the sink. He turned, leaning against the counter. It's going to be a long process with Chloe. There may be a divorce. It will be difficult. I know, I said. But I won't be coming to you with that burden, he said. Not to fix it. Maybe just to talk about it sometimes, as my mother, not as a casualty in the war. That is what I am here for, I said. He hugged me then, a firm, warm embrace. No hesitation. I love you, Mom. I love you too, David. He drove away. I stood at the door, watching his car until it turned the corner. The sun was high, washing the front yard in bright, clear light. I went back inside. I cleared our mugs and plates. I washed them and put them away. I looked around my kitchen. It was just a room again, a place for coffee and conversation, for cooking and quiet mornings. The ghosts of that Thursday dinner were gone, laid to rest by truth and consequence. There was no triumphant joy in it. There was a deep, solid peace, the kind that comes not from victory over another, but from the reclamation of one's own ground. The poison had been identified and expelled. The boundaries were clear. My son's eyes were open. I touched the recipe card on the counter, the one for Michael's stew. The edges were soft from time. I traced the faded writing. Then I put it back in its box. The house was quiet. It was my quiet. It was not the silence of being overlooked, but the silence of being finally seen. And that was enough.